The sun had begun its slow descent behind the low hills when Ayanna stepped out onto the narrow porch of her cabin. The air carried the subtle scent of pine and dust, mingling with the faint tang of wood smoke from a distant hearth. She sank onto the weathered bench that ran along the cabin's edge, tucking her legs beneath her and resting her hands on her knees. In the quiet of the fading day, the world felt unkindly large, and yet intimately small all at once. She stared out over the rolling fields where wild grass whispered in the evening wind, imagining the riders who might pass along the trail, but none ever did. In the townspeople's eyes, she existed more as a shadow than a person, the girl no one would choose, the woman no one would marry. Her thoughts traced back to the countless times she had overheard them speak, voices curling like smoke around her name. Too quiet, one would say. Not much of dowry, another whispered with the sly cruelty of someone who had never known loneliness as she had. Even when she offered her hands to help, mending coats, tending fires, cooking a simple meal for weary travelers, they would glance at her, smile politely, and turn away, as though her presence were a mistake in the pattern of their lives. Ayanna had learned to carry rejection not as bitterness, but as a steady ache in her chest, a rhythm that marked the hours in the absence of companionship. She had learned, too, to speak quietly to the air, whispering the cruel truth she had long accepted. No man is willing to take me as his wife, not even as company. The sound of hooves disturbed the stillness, distant at first, then drawing nearer in deliberate, measured beats. A tall figure appeared against the horizon, mounted on a dark bay horse that moved with calm assurance. Rowan Hale rode with a quiet certainty, the kind that spoke of years spent navigating both trail and solitude. His hat shaded a weathered face, and his dark eyes scanned the land, attentive, but not searching for anything in particular. Yet when they fell upon Ayanna, sitting alone on her bench as if the world had forgotten her entirely, he hesitated. Something about her presence, her stillness, her quiet dignity, made him pause in a way few things had over the years. He dismounted slowly, boots thudding against the worn planks of the porch with a sound that startled only slightly. "Evening," he said, his voice low and measured. "Do you know the way to town from here?" His tone was careful, non-intrusive, but threaded with a genuine concern that caught her off guard. She looked up, startled, unsure how to respond. In his presence, the weight she had carried for so long, the constant whisper of judgment, the coldness of avoidance, felt lighter, though no words were exchanged to explain why. I can show you," she said finally, her voice shaking as it had many times before when faced with someone who truly looked at her. She rose, the bench creaking under her slight weight, and led him a few steps down the uneven path, keeping her eyes mostly on the ground. Rowan followed without pressing, giving her the space to move as she felt she must, but never straying beyond the careful line of respect that had defined his entrance into her world. As they walked, the quiet tension between them grew. Rowan noticed the stiffness in her shoulders, the way she hugged herself as if trying to fold into the earth, small and unnoticed. He also noticed the kindness in her eyes, subtle but persistent, like a candle flickering in a storm. She was aware of his gaze, and the mixture of fear and something dangerously close to hope made her chest tighten. She wanted to retreat back into the cabin, away from the scrutiny of any man, but the simple act of his presence was enough to hold her in place. Later, after Rowan had left, the distant sound of the saloon bell reached him in town, carrying with it snippets of conversation that made his jaw tighten. Men spoke in low tones about the native girl up at the cabin, words laced with judgment and disregard. "No man wants her," one said. "She's cursed," another muttered. Rowan listened, silent, the weight of their cruelty pressing against his chest. And then he understood, fully, what Ayanna carried every day. Not just the solitude, but the harsh opinion of those who believed they knew her worth better than she did herself. His hand tightened around the glass he had been holding, but he said nothing aloud, simply standing, taking a deep breath, and making a decision without fanfare. By the time he rode back toward the cabin, night had begun to settle over the valley. The porch was empty now, save for Ayanna, who had returned to her bench. She hugged her knees again, eyes tracing the darkness at the edge of the clearing, wondering if the world had truly forgotten her entirely. When she saw him return, heart lifted and fell at the same instant. He dismounted slowly, deliberately, and stepped onto the porch with careful footing, the faint scrape of leather against wood punctuating the quiet night. "I didn't like the way they spoke about you in town," he said simply, voice steady but soft. Ayana's breath caught. No one had ever said such a thing to her before, not with conviction, not with concern. She tried to shrink away, instinctively, ashamed of the raw hope stirring in her chest, but he did not move closer or press her with questions. He knelt slightly, a gesture neither grandiose nor theatrical, but intimate in its humility. She finally allowed herself to speak the truth she had carried for years, her voice barely above a whisper. "No man is willing to take me as his wife. Not even as company. I'm nothing here." Rowan's eyes softened, and he shook his head, a faint smile breaking the tension of his face. "You're wrong," he said quietly, fiercely. "You deserve better than the judgment of a town that refuses to see you." "I see you." Ayana's chest tightened, tears forming unbidden. She wanted to tell him not to pity her, to leave her in her solitude. Yet the gentleness of his presence, the patience in his posture, the quiet respect in his eyes made it impossible. She felt the walls around her heart, built over years of quiet rejection, tremble. The climax arrived not with shouts, not with grand declarations, but with a subtle, breathtaking shift of intention. Rowan stepped closer, gently, sensing the hesitation that would allow her to retreat if he pushed too hard. He lowered himself to one knee in the dirt of the porch, beneath the open sky, in the dim glow of the fading day. "Ayana," he said softly, voice unshakable, "don't let them decide your worth. Not tonight, not ever." She gasped, the weight of his words breaking through the months of isolation, the coldness, the whispered cruelties. "Then what worth do I have?" she asked, trembling, as if asking the question aloud might make it true. Rowan lifted her gaze, holding her eyes with steady patience. "If you walk away from me now," he said, "I'll lose the chance to know the strongest soul I've ever met." Ayana stepped forward, hesitant, as though she were afraid to trust her own hope. Her hand flew to her mouth, a small, involuntary gesture of awe and disbelief. Rowan's voice, low and unwavering, invited her further. "Let me stay tonight. Not inside, just here. Let me prove the world wrong about you." And for the first time in a long, long time, Ayana allowed herself to be seen, not as a shadow, not as the girl no one wanted, but as someone worthy of care, of attention, of gentle protection. She whispered, her voice trembling yet firm, "Stay." The night air seemed to pause around them, holding its breath with a quiet reverence. Rowan knelt before her, and Ayana trembled with the strange, intoxicating warmth of being acknowledged. In that suspended moment, the cruelty of the town, the isolation, the whispered rejections, all of it faded into the dark, leaving only the fragile, shining promise of connection. And perhaps that is how healing begins, not with grand proclamations, but with one soul kneeling for another in the quiet of an ordinary evening. Sometimes the world will not see your worth, and sometimes it will take only one steady, patient heart to remind you. Tonight, beneath the open sky and the gentle hum of the frontier, Ayana and Rowan discovered that truth together.